Hi, this is Lola, and this is a 6 weeks maintenance trim on her. Lola has a slight club foot on her right front foot. Okay, this is Dave Fitton, and he trims Lola.
Can't get in there, she's too tight. Get rid of that old floppy frog.
Now you're removing the old,
Just getting rid of the
Sold.
old stuff that's trapped inside from all this old contracted foot.
some people would say that you should leave that to provide extra protection.
No,
for a trail
overgrowth
horse.
is overgrowth. When you have a foot that tall and that contracted, it adds to the problem. If you keep leaving it, it's all a matter of if the horse can't move enough to use the ground, which is what gives the resistance that causes wear. If that horse can't move because it's in a tiny enclosure, it's not getting proper wear. It doesn't matter if you take them out and exercise them every day for 15 or 20 minutes, it isn't enough. So they're going to get way overgrown. Even a horse that isn't conformationally deformed like she is, and that's because of an injury and the way she was done for a long time. But overgrowth is overgrowth. It's doing more good or more harm than good at a certain point. And with her, there's no wear happening at all. So that's why we have the tools we have, is we're mimicking the proper wear that otherwise she would get on her own. Anytime you can peel it off and it's literally just flaking and crumbly, that's simply stuff that's been trapped there dead for a long period of time, and all the new structure underneath is just building up underneath it until after a while all of this laying there trapped becomes pressure, and pressure is what will cause the inflammation in the foot, and you'll get a sore, ouchy horse. And then these excessively high heels, yeah, she's a little clubby like, but they still have to have that 30-degree hairline. If you're looking at them laterally from here to here, this has to be 30 degrees. And if they get too tall of a heel and that 30 degrees starts to get shallow, it's literally putting them on their toe. And if you'll notice, her toes has that little flip in the toe area. That's not good either. That's just more pressure. So we've got to just continually rebalance, ideally keeping these feet up every week so nothing will grow back that you trim off. That's the only true way to do a correction. This mare's pretty tough. She can have quite a bit of foot taken off, but you can't have too much taken off in one part of the foot and leave another part of the foot untrimmed, because it's not so much that you're taking too much off that's hurting the foot that might cause them to walk a little awkward. You have to be careful on a horse like this that's out of balance, that the ouchiness or sore-footed like head bobbing isn't coming from the foot, it's coming from these three joints. Because the joints get used to being out of balance in one spot for so long, they'll start to wear that way. And then when you come along and take too much off and upset it, then they're going to be joint sore, not so much foot sore. Yeah, the foot trim might cause the joints to be sore, but that goes all the way up. And that's why she gets tight back and she gets tight in the ribs, and that's compensatory walking due to you know, painful situations down the lower extremities. But in her case, 90% of it's always going to be joint. It's a lot better than it used to be, but it's an ongoing battle. She's improving slowly but surely, and she's in a good spot for sure. It's kind of like her heels. I can't take all that heel off. I can go down a little bit, but I'll do the rest with my rasp. Put just a little bit of a bevel in the toe so she doesn't have a lot of pressure that keeps that toe flip happening, and then I'll finish everything off with knife and rasp. And again, how much bar I take off, what determines that factor is whether or not she has embedded bar, whether it's driven in soft tissue against and sometimes even underneath the live frog.
How do you use your thumb on your opposite hand to help guide that knife?
My black thumb?
Yeah.
That's just a lever point that I'm kind of pushing down on my knife, but I'm using it more as a lever and just using this hand as my guide. Let's move her around so I can get balance.
Okay, so we had to transition to her other foot mid-process because
She was a little uncomfortable weighting this foot and picking it up. I can see a high spot right in here between my two fingers. It's like a bump, and that's direct pressure. If you notice, there's a little bit of a push-up area right here. If you follow the tubules, it's pushing up here. It's not straight anymore. It's very slight, but it was enough that she was uncomfortable, so I just moved to this side and fix it. A lot of times, if you drag your rasp on a diagonal right there, you can see right there where I hit it, and it shows the high spot. It's balanced right in the middle, like right there.
makes sense.
And that happens to be where the switchback is, or the bar heel triangle, whatever you want to call it. It's where the bar intersects the hoof wall, and when that's high in that spot, it's direct pressure against the bar, and it could be driving it up in the foot. It's hard to say. All I know is that she was uncomfortable and she was constantly moving away, so you try and find the problem. That could very well have been it. And there again, you can see I'm right on the high spot, and I'm starting to make contact coming down. So now I just go like that, and now it's more even and balanced. This side wasn't so bad, but there's a little high spot right there. Now if I was to go back to the other foot, she'd probably be a little more comfortable. It's something just that tiny will throw them off. And keep that in mind too, a high spot like that, they may be good in their pin, but the minute you get on them, if you leave a little pointy heel like that, and you take them out and you try and ride them on this hard ground, they're gonna let you know that they got some discomfort going on, and it's usually a high spot. Direct pressure. Now again, you can see here, and I haven't touched this except I think when Craig cleaned the foot. You can see a definite ridge right here where this is lower than this. This is all the trapped. I don't have a pin. I can show you with my knife. All of this in here, here's the bar right there. And it's in its place, it's just tall. But all of this is trapped sole from this wall being higher than the sole. There's a lot of space underneath it, and it could not wear it out properly. This was just crumbling, laying there dead. You can see how that just pops right off. I'm not putting any pressure. You can actually pull that off with the curl of your knife or your hook pick. So I just start up here on this high side on the trap, and I just get under it and I just start moving it off. Now you can see the color difference. Right here's the new sole. You can see these little cracks, the dark lines. That's the edges of the overlaid bar and sole that was laying on top. And I just smooth it out right down to this new sole. I don't go any deeper than that. There's no reason to. If I go any deeper than that, you're basically just cutting away any callus that may be forming, and you're thinning the sole. All you want to do is get underneath the stuff that you can hear the nice big deep breath. I just relieved all that pressure and she's thanking. But if you go any deeper than that, which is laying there dead, needing to be worn off, trimmed off, you're invading live sole, and then after that you're simply thinning the sole. You try and keep from doing that. The minute you hit the live sole, it will become firmer, more consistent, and it'll feel, for lack of a better description, kind of like a frozen bar of soap. And there's not a lot of resistance to stop your cut, but you can feel it get thicker. You almost have to experience it with a knife, but you just don't want to go there. Get all the soft, flaky stuff off, get high spots off, scrape it off, whatever you got to do, and then just finish your trim, getting everything else balanced. But leaving too much, thinking you're protecting something, the first 3 words says it all. Leaving too much. Sometimes leaving something untrimmed is simply not taking enough off. I don't know how to put it any simpler. It's what needs to be trimmed needs to be trimmed. You can't second guess that. It's just, that's Mother Nature's way of keeping the foot active in its mechanical ability. You get too much of any one thing, high heels, too much sole, too much bar, that slows down the mechanical ability of the foot, which is needed to help move blood and keep everything healthy and go in the right direction.
This is not so much the case on her, but I do see it a lot in horses that I've been trimming. That where the toe is stretching out, the frog stretches out as well. Can you take a second and explain how you find the actual point of connection of the apex of the frog?
Yeah, the apex of the frog, when I'm trying to find the true apex, I just simply get my knife underneath and I lift up. If it is being embedded into overgrown sole, what happens, that sole is, the frog is stretchy just by nature. It's made to give and
cushion
move
the sole
with the foot and help create the blood flow and provide cushioning and shock absorbency and all that. But once that sole gets to be too much, it will kind of grab hold of that frog, and as the toe starts getting longer, it starts to stretch that frog out with it. So when you're trimming for a 1/3, 2/3 foot, if you don't know where the true apex of the frog is, your 1/3, 2/3 is going to be off, and you'll forever have too long of a toe on your horse. And too long of a toe, it's kind of like putting long fingernails on the edge of a table and pushing down against your cuticle, which is at the back of your fingernail. And after a while, the inflammation, if you take your hand off that table and you go to push down, it's going to hurt. So when a horse is reaching forward, and when they start to break over in forward motion, it's putting leverage against that long toe, and it'll either cause them to start stumbling because they're picking their foot up too quick, or they'll simply shorten their stride, which puts a lot of stress on their extensor muscles, which is what pulls their leg forward, and now you got a horse that's real short and choppy. So you've either got a long toe, that could be a combination toe, heels, and bars. You could just simply have too long of a toe, and that leverage is what's hurting because it's stretching that sole. It's causing tension. It's like taking a piece of cellophane or something and you stretch it just as hard as you can, And then pretty quick, it's going to start to want to tear and rip at the furthest outer edge. It's kind of like taking a piece of paper and constantly bending it back and forth, back and forth. The weakness of it is pretty quick, it's going to fracture. That's how you get the stretched white line, where it's thicker than any other part of the quarters. The quarters, they'll be maybe 1/8 of an inch to 3/16 of an inch wide, and then all of a sudden you see a toe that's maybe pushing 1/4 of an inch. That's going to be typically too long of a toe. Since we're on toes, if Craig can come around here, when a horse, the other indication of too long of a toe, you'll start seeing him square off. And that's a foot that when it leaves the ground, it's kind of flipping backwards like this. And when it flips backwards, it's causing excessive wear more than normal, and it'll start squaring off that long toe, and you can see this is pretty square. If that flat spot is over here, like this, then you probably got too high of a heel on the opposite side, the diagonal. The same thing, if it's squaring off too far this way, then the diagonal heel is probably too tall. Doesn't mean your toe's okay, and simply that you have a high heel. It could be a combination of both. The fact that it's squaring off should tell you the toe's too long. So what you want to do is get a gauge, ruler, from the hairline to the ground on a finished toe is typically right around 3 1/4 inches. That's just rule of thumb. It isn't written in blood or whatever, but typically it's right around 3 1/4 inches. That's an average size horse. And then you can adjust it from ponies to draft horses and large thoroughbreds and warm bloods and Hanoverians, all that stuff. It's one of those, our favorite saying is it depends. Never assume that every angle from every gauge that's typically used to help a farrier, a barefoot trimmer, whatever the case may be, a vet, they are simply gauges, they're guidelines. It isn't written in stone that that's where it has to be. It's a guideline.
Every horse is unique.
Every horse is unique. The guidelines that I like to use are taken from a broad range of ponies, and a broad range of horses, and then a broad range of draft horses. And then we take a mean average, and then we go from there. And that's usually where your gauges are coming from, is the mean average over a large number of different animals. And then you customize that to each and every foot, basically, depending on conformational defects, whatever the case may be. So you have to use your head a little bit, and don't take it for granted that every foot has to be cookie cutter the same. They are in a sense of the word, but every horse is different. It's like if I was to cut Craig's fingernails as short as I keep my fingernails, he'd probably slap me. Everybody's a little bit different, so you have to keep that in mind and use your head, use your own knowledge. Don't just take every word for being right. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead. I want to try and get these heels right here where the wrinkled periopal is, not this one. This is a sheared heel. It's pushed up higher, meaning this wall is longer. And I've been correcting it. It's coming down. It's hard to do once every 6 weeks, but I'll relieve the part that's pushed up too high, and it's usually from right here. You can see this little wrinkle in the sidewall right there, and that's where this foot's kind of got leverage against it. That tells me that this is the high spot. You can follow the tubules up to the high spot in the hairline, and then what I'll do is a rim notch, and I'll pacify that to ground pressure and allow that to drop down. And again, you can see my thumb is simply there as a lever point, and I'm just rolling my knife, trying to get that little cliff edge on the end of the bar. And then I'm blending it in with the rest of the sole. Right here, same thing. I'll just reach around, I'll grab my toe, I'll turn my knife around, and just find the end of that bar and just clean it up. Right here, I'm literally holding my knife. I'm finding where it's flat on the bar. Right now I'm pushing with my thumb, and then my other hand is simply the guide, keeping everything flat. And I just come right up the bar and leave it right at the hoof wall edge. And that bar is pretty much done. I'll probably touch it up when I lower stuff. Okay, we've got her a little more comfortable. We'll go back to the other foot. All right. You can see the edge of that overgrown stuff. I'm just trying to get under that edge, clean it off, and then just chase it down right to the edge of the frog. She's politely telling me she's got a rest. And again, I've got her foot close to where it needs to be, but what she's doing now is she's feeling a difference in the angle of her joints. I mean, she's got full thickness of her sole, other than the stuff that was overgrown and trapped and couldn't be worn off, but changing the angle of her foot changes the angles of every joint in that lower part of the leg first. And then in movement, she'll start feeling it in her knees, maybe tight muscles from taking, because you cannot have loose, flaccid, deep digital flexor tendons by jacking up a heel. That's a common misnomer, I think, because these tendons, the extensor and the deep digital, the flexor, all that is needed to help keep your joints together. And if you have a consistently loose tendon and ligament structure, they have to take that slack up somewhere, and it's always going to be the muscle pulling everything up. So if they're tight in the shoulders, that again will make them a little limpy, if you will, or a little off, a little short in their stride. And if it's a chronic situation, anybody that's had a bad back or a pulled shoulder or sprained ankle, your whole leg up into your hip, it just goes right up into the small of your back, and then it ends up in your shoulders and your neck, and you're walking all hunched over simply because you had a sprained ankle. It's much the same in a horse. Anything that's out of balance, to take that balance up and help correct it, they have to tighten up their muscular structure, which in turn causes them, because they're using muscles 24/7, they're burning more energy, which keeps a horse a little more poor. His body score may be a 4.5 to a 5, and they just don't want to gain weight. Look to imbalance in the structure of the horse. So that's my take on all that stuff. You can see here I'm starting my cut with a knife, and then I just let it roll in my fingers, and that brings my knife out of too deep of a cut, and I'm concentrated mostly on the edge of the end of the bar. There again, there's a loose floppy piece of old dead frog just kind of laying there. So I'll just lightly trim that out of the way and open this up so all the goop and gunk and crap can find its way out of the foot. And yes, these frogs are really, really, really skinny. It's because of all this severe contraction in the back just pushing in on the foot. You can see me pushing in. and it just won't pull out very wide. It only goes out as wide as it'll push in, but that deep crease right in between the bulbs, when the foot's down, that shows you a contracted foot. So it gives you an idea that, you know, she's standing, walking, can be lightly ridden just at a walk, but this is a horse that just, she's going to be for quite a while, if not for the rest of her life, just light duty.
And that's all
Because
the
until,
owner uses
yeah,
her
if
for.
you can't get at these feet, literally, I've had horses like this years ago at my house, at my clinic, to where I'm touching them up once or twice every week, just to keep the correction going so they don't backslide, because every time they backslide, it's like we're starting over from scratch. I've been trimming her for quite a while. We've got her hips to where she's at least moving, but she's kind of at an impasse right now because I can't get to her often enough, which also means I'm going to be training Craig to do more and more. So I've got a lot of that out of my way now. It isn't finished. I can start the flat bar right there, take that little sharp edge off. There's still a little edge here, but I can take a lot of this with my knife so I don't have to use my rasp quite so much. But now we'll start. There it is. Right where I left it. This is where a grinder comes in handy. Or a brand new rasp.
You want to use a grinder? I have one.
Yeah, I'm almost done with these.
Now you're not rasping the sole itself, you're only rasping
No,
the hoof wall, correct?
Just started to hit the sole, and so I don't thin the sole out. As soon as I make contact with that upper area, I know I've pretty much gone as far as I can go with this foot. As far as getting my air gap in and lowering the heels, I know these feet pretty good, otherwise I would have my gauges, which I can do just to show you where she's at. But I don't want to over thin that area of the sole, because I'm taking live sole, and that area will be thinner than the rest. It'll stretch too much on impact, causes more tension, a little more discomfort, so we just try and stay away from that. Yeah, the sole's thinner than it was, and she will be building more callus as soon as she hits her pin, because her pin's kind of fluffy. But the important thing is not to over shorten the foot, because again, we have to keep in mind this joint, and then the coffin joint, which is just underneath the top of your wall. So P1, P2, P3, and then it starts just going up. You got your knee, your elbow, and the point of the shoulder are your other joints. These aren't affected quite as much, as these are the main concern. So that being said, I'll get my gauge, I'll show you where her heel height is set, and then I'll just do a little bit of cleanup on that foot and we'll be almost done with it, and then I'll finish this one. We're gonna go to my gauge set for the horse. It's 1 1/8 inches. I go to the hair bearing skin straight down from the exit of the collateral groove, right down in here, and go forward. And you can see she's just a little bit taller than what the gauge calls for. This is a sheared heel. This is, if you want to call it normal. But she's right there at it. And then I verify just by looking. So she's, when I hit that sole in the corner where the air gap needs to be, I've got the air gap. You know, you lose it on this soft rubber, but this gauge basically validates Mother Nature's clues, the wrinkled periopal and all that stuff. And on her, I almost always check just to make sure. I don't want to leave it too tall, but I don't want to over shorten it either. So she's pretty persnickety about where I leave stuff. Now you can see where I've left a ledge right here in the bar. That's pressure. There's a little bit of pressure here. You can see where I barely started touching sole, and I'll just come in here and I'll just put my knife blade off a level and just go with the contour of her concavity and just take that off that I rasped, just so there's nothing sticking up above the wall that will make contact with the ground first. In other words, my concavity will be pretty even all the way down. On her, it can't be because she's so steep. Deep, if you will. Same thing over here. There's level. What I do is I just barely tip it up to where the edge of that, you can see how much of an edge I'm taking, and then I can just move it right on back. And then I take off that little end. I don't go clear down here and start over. I just take that off that's flat. And then I can go in here. The sun's out of my glasses. And just pull up to flatten that bar. Same thing here. I come back here as if that wall was going all the way through. Lay my knife edge right where it is. Start my cut. Flatten it back out. And be pretty much done. Okay, all I did here was just flatten out those high spots. Let's just kind of see where we're at. And you can see my goal is going to be the top of that frog without taking any more of that frog off at all. Verify here, same thing here. So I can bring the heels down just a bit more. This side of the frog's a little tall. So I get underneath the loose flap. You can see it puckering without me cutting. And that'll take me right to the other side. And then instead of rasping and taking forever to get that down, and I'm just following the contour of her sole. And when I'm done, you can see it comes out all on its own. And if you look at it from a lateral view, you'll see where there's an air gap in it. Come down a little lower. You'll see where it's got, I call it a scoop. And that's an unfinished lateral wall, but that gives you an idea of what, just by following the natural contour of the sole, that arch is always there. We'll go to the other side. Now you can see here there's not much for me to grab. That's telling me that this side's already where it needs to be, or close to it. I've got the heels pretty much even. This is still a little tall. Now when I'm sighting across the heels, I'm wanting things to be pretty level according to where the bulbs are. This is still a little tall. So So give it a couple of more strokes. And then if you want, you can go back and check your gauge. Watch your feet. Okay, that one's dead on. Oops, I slipped. And that one's dead on. Now we'll just clean up the bars, take this ledge off. That's passive. I can come back here again. Flatten that out. I can come straight up this way, or I get my other knife and I'll just come down on that upper edge. Go like that. Or you can take your other knife, quit, and come right up the upper edge and flatten it. I prefer to do it this way, it's easier for me. Make sure that there's no sole sticking up above the wall. That's some more of that flaky trap stuff.
Should I be concerned about fungus and bacteria in those black areas underneath that old dry sole?
This is a judgment call. If that is a deficit or way lower than the rest of the foot, and you're doing this and you're still getting that flaky stuff, you can just scrape it off. But don't keep going deep because you're just making a bigger deficit. Just make sure that that black fungusy stuff, you can take a little wire brush like your bronze one over there with the orange handle. You can take it and just use a little pressure and get that stuff right out. If it'll come right out, there's no reason in taking a knife and going deeper.
What if it does go deeper?
If you're concerned, you can see a ledge right here, right under that little flake. Lola. Get right underneath that edge and just make a light back pass. And again, you can see through that, it's so thin. I just touched it and it fell off. If you're concerned, go get, see how that's just disappeared right there. Just go get your purple thrush medication and paint on it. Just being exposed to the air, if there's bacteria or fungus exposing to the air, that oxygen alone is enough to kill it. But you're down far enough, that isn't going to be a hindrance. She'll probably polish that off when she gets into sandy stuff. Just like taking a piece of sandpaper, they'll finish that off usually by themselves. She was wearing a little crooked, like this. This was the higher heel of the two. This is where the high point was on this heel, but this was the higher heel of the two, and that's what caused her to wear crooked on the toe. So what I do first, I go on the longer side that's pointing this way, and then I'll even out the length according to the golden line and round that toe back up, and now I'll take this flare off. Now if you've got a lot of stuff trapped down in here between the golden line and the wall, which is causing the flare, you can run your hand up and you can see, you can feel where it's pushed out. What I'll do is rim notch that. I don't like pulling back because I've slipped, and that's where all these white lines are coming from. So again, I'm using my thumb and I'm just taking wall away. as deep as that dirt got pushed up. And then it always leaves a little bit of a sharp edge. You can take your rasp, re-bevel that.
That hoof wall will actually descend.
Yeah, this
to where
is
it'll
an
be
area
even with the sole, won't
exactly. Without pressure on it, it'll grow down now tight. And what I did is I relieved that to stop dirt from being packed up in that flared area. It'll keep flaring up, and pretty quick you've got dirt clear into the hairline, and then you've got a horizontal crack that happens, and that would be a fungal infection due to dirt crawling up inside that you never got out. And by relieving that and keeping that wall perpendicular to the ground as you're trimming it off, it'll grow down straight. Because if you trim in, just follow the dirt line with your knife standing up like this, you're going to leave a V'd out area, and that'll retrap wet crap from their pin, and it'll keep forcing its way in and causing a wedge effect, and it'll keep flaring. So when you're doing your rim notch, keep your knife flat and keep that wall flat, perpendicular to the ground. And now it'll grow down flat and nothing can get in there and jam up. Now, that's a there's black stain, but I've got a tight connection wall to golden line. That's deep enough. There's no reason to go any more than that. If you want to make sure that all the fungus is gone, again, get your purple stuff, paint it down in there, white vinegar, whatever you want to use, but and don't worry about taking too much wall right there, because that's the air gap anyway. There's not going to be any pressure on it, and it'll come down pretty quick. See this? Overgrown, just laying there. I had to tear it off, but it had a definite lower edge. This black edge was what was in next to the frog. I just get under one edge of it and I just pull it off until it breaks, and then I have a base point I can go to trim to. Because usually where that tears off is where the end of my knife work needs to be done. And you can see, let's get this frog, and you can see when it gets trapped, the frog will come loose, but it won't come off because nothing's there to wear it off. Because stuff gets overgrown, and that's where the theory of, oh, let's leave it there for protecting the foot, or if it keeps growing back, the foot must want it there. That's not true. If it keeps growing back, it simply means that there's not enough movement to cause wear. It's really that simple. And it also keeps people from over trimming. If you keep harping on, don't take so much. Okay, you can see now how much heel she likes to grow. So I can go right to there simply because I know that's how far on her I need to go. And she likes frequent rest because this is her bad hip. Come on, girl. Not giving me much of a window to work in today. And I usually come out right at the edge. Now we come here real quick. This side is mostly just heel height because she has such a sheared heel from that bad hip that she tilts to the outside and lands on the quarters, but she always leaves the heel. It's a weird situation. This is literally where we need to trim at least once a week to get these back feet right to where we can finish her off. Oh, babe. You know, on this foot, it's so deformed. Contraction beyond the vertical. If you look down here, you can see how the hoof, well, you can tell because it's throwing a long shadow. That just tells you that the heel is way underneath the outer edge, or the top edge where the growth starts. Contraction beyond the vertical is probably the single hardest contraction there is to fix. Unilateral, meaning only one side, is hard enough, but when you have bilateral contraction beyond the vertical, you have to stay on top of it constantly, or it's just a forever type thing. On her, this one I've got, it's coming along pretty good. She's still got more here, I think. But this foot, this was the bad hip, the better foot of the two. This was the good side of her body, which is the worst foot because that's where she was throwing all of her weight. And the way she had to put her leg to carry herself, it was collapsing the wall. It was still a challenge. As you can see, she doesn't like to stand very well. And it would just lack of muscles. I can't even remember what the injury was from.
It was a stifle injury.
Stifle injury?
And she had a bowed tendon at one point also. But the stifle injury was huge, and
it was pretty bad.
I believe she went through the PRP therapy. She spent a month in a swim rehabilitation.
Yeah, I remember I trimmed
clinic.
her out there once when she was there. It was a neat place, but boy, are they expensive. I take the bars down on these back feet a little more than I normally do, just to help the heels to open up a little bit better. And it's sort of a guessing game, judgment call on how far I go. I don't take them all the way out, but it gives a little more heel action, and it's helping her to open up. Decontract, if you will.
Hold Lola.
Oh, she did not.
Turd. Girl. I'm sure glad I don't have 6 of these. See where that's laid over? I'm just under the edge, peeling it off. There, she didn't want to stand. Don't sit like I'm sitting when you're doing this. Anybody other than Craig's watching, because you can get cow kicked silly right here. And she's starting to lean, so that's a hint.
And I should tell you, she, although this is the hip that was damaged,
this foot is still much like the other foot. She's higher on the inside than the outside. She's a little more balanced on this foot. And I'll come out right in the middle of the air gap on this side. Good girl. And for anybody that's watching this other than Craig, don't ever try and take as much as I take in one swoop. You'll either hurt yourself or you'll take too much off the horse. I'm only doing it because I have a certain comfort window with her, and I already know how deep I can go. Can't bend that way. See that edge? Just following it right on down. And it generally will come out right there at the end of the bar. Okay, a little bit of that. Ooh. Down right now. A little bit of more knife work.
For those of you that are starting to learn to trim, one of the things that continues to be challenging for me, I've been learning now for about 4 years, is simply how do you stand? How do you hold your feet? How do you support a leg when a horse is difficult, when they're uncomfortable, when they're stomping? And I've been stomped on enough, even in steel-toed boots, to know that I don't want to be stepped on. So I always love to watch videos of people that are trimming, not just to see what are they doing with their hands and with their knives and the rasp, but also how are they standing, how are they holding the feet with the knives, etc. And I encourage you to pay attention to that as well. You can see my old rasp marks, rasping that toe flare out. I just round it up and get the right angle on, the right length, and then
Take as much of that out as I can. I have found that if I take too much toe off or back on this mare, it doesn't leave the correct amount of toe or close to it to cause pressure on her heels to keep proper wear on the heel, so it doesn't keep overgrowing. It's a really hard balancing act. Oh, quit. Now you can see where she drug this foot. What I'm doing, I'm bringing, sometimes I call them toe quarters. You can see this crack, and that was from consistently overloading the toe, and this would flare out and start peeling off. So I just bring all that back. Until we have a nice round toe again. There you go. Same thing here, a little bit of a toe crack. That foot was doing this, simply because of the way she's got it worn. So for now, I keep that back. I'm not taking a lot off of here because I over-shorten it. And that's real thin on that break. So I'm using the cutting edge right all the way around, and I'm just thinning that out to where it's got a tight connection.
Whoa. Back up. Back up. Whoa. What do you think?
It should be a policy.
It should be. Should be
And
running
wearing
through
rubber
something.
gloves, it's like the bank isn't shut down. So see how she's got that knee bucked?
Yeah.
Get out of here.
I was gonna go back.